All right, lab 2. Wherever that folder went. Let's try this again. Lab 2. Okay, let's start off with blank document over here. Oh, dying.
Should we type it?
Hmm?
Should we type it?
If you want, you can type on your own too. If you do you not have it on the screen? Who doesn't have my screen on their screen? Just wondering. Yeah. Oh, you can still turn it on, and it should be there. Hopefully. So, but I'm gonna try again, just in case. Actually, wait a second. Just in case. Okay. All right. So this time around, let's actually separate our CSS and JS file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder for CSS and a new folder for my JS stuff. So you should have the index file with the 2 folders in there. And then in the folders, I have one called app.css and another file called app.js. Right now, your folder structure should look something like this, with its own individual files. And then we're going to link them all together. You know how to link them all together? How do I link a CSS file? Ooh, boy. How do I link a CSS file? Remember? Link, and then href equals to, and if you have it in the folder, you don't, if you don't have it in the folder, then don't type CSS. But because I have a CSS folder, so it's called css/app.css. Because I'm linking from my index to my CSS folder to the CSS folder. And what else is here? Do you all remember? What goes on? Type, text. What else is here? Rel equals to style sheet. And the same with my script over here. Script source equals to JS. Oops, that's not it. JS/app.js. So we're not gonna do inline anymore or in document. From now on, we'll do all our CSS in the CSS file and all our scripting in the app.js file. Now, how do you know that this is linked properly? How do you know that they're actually linked? Have you learned how to see it? Inspect. That's correct. If we opened this file over here, and not that, obviously, and go to our developer tools, one of these tabs on the top can show you if they're linked or not. If you go to sources, you would see that I have the index.html file, the CSS folder, and the JS folder. And that the app.js is here, and then the app.css here. That means my index.html, the file that I'm on, is linked with these two files. How can we test case this? For example, if you get rid of the link href thing and save it and refresh it, you'll notice that my CSS folder is no longer there. That means I didn't link it properly. So you might go, okay, maybe I don't have it linked properly. What could be the reason? Reasons, common mistake. You may have spelled script wrong. You may have spelled source wrong. Very common. Even right now, some of the second years still sell script as SRCIPT. And it's like, how come my script is not working? Or source with SCR. You may have typed the location wrong. Maybe you don't have a CSS folder and a JS folder where your file is located. So by typing in css/app.css, you're not linking it since you don't have that folder called CSS, or you don't have that folder called JS. Other common mistakes could be you didn't close your script, or you didn't close your link, or you misspell something here like text, and you use txt or similar things instead. And that's what could potentially happen. So make sure you have both your CSS and JS. Oh, super common mistake as well is you didn't save. We had this in the last class, not just last 2 hours. It's like 8 times from 8 different people who didn't save. Check if it's linked properly. Because if it's your test and it's not linked properly, no matter how much you test, it will fail. How do I test it this time? And then go to source and see if the files are actually there. If it's not there, that means you're not. I made a new folder called Lab2 and yes, so I made a new folder on my desktop called Lab2, and inside Lab2 I have a CSS and a JS folder. Yeah, the actual file itself. You can. That's why I'm linking it, right? Because there's a app.css in the CSS folder, and an app.js in the JS folder. App.css. App.js. Make a folder?
No, mix plus files is fine.
Why don't you drag it back? That's one? I mean, alternatively, you can go to your terminal and touch. So why don't you drag this off one of the classes? Open up your CSS. Your folder is called CSS. because it doesn't show you the extension since it's a folder. So right click.
But do you have a game?
Get rid of the last instance. There you go. Now you can refresh your. There you go. While you're waiting, then, on your own, do the following. We'll have a div, call it app for now, SAP, app. This is a very common practice. People like to put everything in one single div. So if you're making an app, people like to do something like this because if you change the body, everything goes away. So they like to separate it out. But in any case, we'll have a button for now and another div or so. And what I want you to do is the following. I'm just writing it out. You don't have to write this part, which is start with a 100 by 100 div with a of your choice, and then when the button is clicked on, change the dimensions to 200 by 200. Go for it. Try that one. And you will be doing this inside your app.js file and app.css file. And you were wondering how we can have multiple windows at once so that I don't have to, so I can have references. Under view in your bracket, there's a horizontal or vertical split. If you do horizontal splits, then you can drag your app.js file down there and work on it at the same time, or app.css file. So that may be useful for you. And you'll also notice that you're going to get some errors in your JS files. Just ignore all the errors that goes on in your bracket. You see an X in your bracket, ignore that. They mean nothing.
Can you show me the rest of the instructions, please?
So right now, we want to build a habit, a trait of typing without any fear and be comfortable with it. Probably half the time it won't work and there will be errors. You got to figure out what it is. I shouldn't say half the time, probably 90% of the time. And what you're doing is trial and error. And also, just to give you a start, in your CSS and JS file, you don't need the tag anymore. You don't need to type script or style in there. You just directly type all your CSS stuff, or you just directly type your scripting inside. Try it out. So it's view, and then horizontal split or vertical. So you can double click it. On your own. reason. The reason is to be outside. You're going to your Take your time and try to be comfortable with typing. Try to get a start on something, even though you may need that. And make sure you save every now and then so that you know that everything is saved in your testing with save files. How do you know that it's saved? If there's a little circle beside the file, that means that file is not saved.
Like a red circle?
No, like a circle.
Oh.
Like you see this circle beside my app.js, that means I didn't save it.
Okay.
There was a change and nothing was saved. Yeah, you can ignore those things. Ignore the next. Then you should test and respect. Go to your. That should always. Go to your sources and see if they're no, only the index HTML. Go to your folder, find it. You know why? Because your index HTML is inside your CSS solutions. And you're saying that you want to go in the CSS version on that CSS. Okay, so this, go to your so it's like I need to go into the CSS. No CSS folder here. Yeah, but your index not showing that one here. It's starting from here. It's not going here because your index isn't there. It's starting from this location. And it's looking for a CSS folder. From this location.
Change this, I take this out.
Yes, so you click on this. Just drag it back up. See if it's linked properly right now. Yeah.
works if I click on the button. I'll leave it left.
Buttons.
Where you want the bit to change? Oh. I just did. So what are those little lashes in it? Document not defined?
No. That's just brackets on error detecting thing. It does nothing.
As long as it works.
You can get rid of it. I'll show that.
Seems not working.
Hey, what's the CSS? No, what's the CSS? Is it just 200? It has to be used.
There's an error on the this one.
You can make it on these one. What really is, there's something wrong. refresh.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is wrong? What is it? What is wrong? Is it right or not?
Or are you gonna do small? And you're supposed to have it all in one function. If you're gonna do it like that. If you're gonna do it by function, you're supposed to have all in one function. Otherwise, you would use an events listener and detect it instead. Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, part of this exercise is to help you build some comfortability of getting it wrong. Because, like I said, 90% of the time that you're doing this, most likely it's not going to work. The first tries anyway. And it's important to get comfortable in it not working so that you know that you have to figure out something to fix. And the more errors you get, the more idea that you'll have on why you get certain errors. Because this is pretty much your test right here, what you see right there, what you're doing. Except you won't be able to ask any questions about how to do it, and you have to just go through it and figure it out until it works. So, first thing is we want to detect the click from the button. So if you follow or you remember from the tutorial or last week, just give an ID for the button. I'll call it but. I'll call it but1. And then perhaps if we are perhaps if you're changing the div, you can give the div an ID as well. Call it box as well. And then in the CSS file, just a simple box with a width of 100 pixel, height of 100 pixel, and a background color of your choice. Start out with that just to make sure it's proper and linked over there. Make sure it's saved. And then we go on to the next part where we go document.query selector. And the object that we're selecting has the ID called but1. And we're asking our browser to listen to the word click. And when the word click does come along, we will modify one thing. The item we're modifying is the box. So we go and do query selector box dot style dot width equals to 200 by 200. 200. So we're changing 100px, which is from our CSS. We're changing that into 200px. And then same with the height. Now, brackets has a default errors detector, whatever it may be, and it detects the really stupid things. So you can ignore it, but if you really don't want to see this X and it gets super annoying, you can change a preference, which I'll show later after everybody has a chance to get this going. Right, so with that, you have a simple click where it rewrites on the app box itself. So some common mistakes are, in the beginning, it could be spelling mistake. It could be consistency mistakes. For example, you may have ID'd it with BOX, but here you may have written capital BOX. That could be a consistency mistake. And then it won't work because capitalization matters. Or you may have spelled query wrong or selector wrong, or you may have forgotten to capitalize the S in selector. Or you may have forgotten to write pixels, or you may have missed pixel and type QX instead because it looks like a P. And, I mean, these are very common normal mistakes in the beginning. More importantly is that you understand that you're grabbing the button from the document and you're asking it to listen to a click, and then you're grabbing the box and you're changing its width and height. Okay, these X's are very annoying in the long run. So what you can do is you can go to brackets and preferences. So on the top there's a bracket tab, and you click on preferences, and it's gonna open a default preferences.json and a brackets.json on for you. You can ignore the default one. The default one you can't change, but if you turn everything to false here, false, and save it. Anything that you see true, turn it to false. Then you would not have those errors anymore. The X's will never come back up. So everywhere that you see true in the brackets.json, just change to false and save it. Command S. And you will not see it again. Hopefully. So that's how you can turn it off. Any questions up to this point? Is that a question or is that? Make sure you save all your files too. Remember, there's a little circle beside the file name. You didn't save it. Now, before we go, is there anyone else that needs anything? No? Yes, no? Before we go on, let's see what happens if we do something wrong. For example, let's say I screwed it up. I misspelled box, and I used a capital B. Very common mistake. Okay. I'm gonna refresh this page. And then you're gonna spot the difference in the developer tool for me. Right now, this is what the developer tool looks like. I'm gonna refresh. I'm gonna click. What's the difference? What happened? Okay. But the developer tool, I just want you to tell me.
It's flashing.
There is a flash, and then it changes. But more importantly, on the top right side, you notice something that tells you something. A red X over there, right? That's when you know something's wrong with your script. To see what's wrong, click on the second tab, console. And there are multiple things you want to see on here. The first item is that it gives you a brief hint description of what it may be. Cannot read property style of null at HTML button elements. So that means they can't read the style of something that doesn't exist. Yeah, that's important. But more importantly is on the right side. What does the right side say? app.js:3. What do you think that means? Line 3 in the app.js file. Well, let's check line 3. Line 3 in the app.js file. That's where I put the error on there, right? So with that, then you know somewhere here something's wrong. Worst comes to worst, you can test case by just commenting line 3 out and see if that error still comes up. It doesn't come up, so that means it is this. And then you will, for your life, split your hair and read that line until you figure out exactly what's wrong. But in this case, we know that it's because of the capital B. Things like misspelling, like something like that, again, you can see document.query selector is not a function. So you can again go, why? What's wrong with my document.query.selector? So very useful. All right. Next item. So we're gonna start out the variable stuff. Let's see why variable and references and or references is important. We'll start with something simple. You notice we are repeating a lot of long lines over here. Select box, select box, select box. Well, what we're gonna do is we're gonna use Chrome's own hard drive, wherever it may be. Let me do the sketch on this. What we're gonna do is we're gonna use its own hard drive and we're gonna start referencing the information there so that we can reuse things over and over again. For example, before I do all the query selector, I can go do something like var for a variable. Means I want to create a reference right now. My box is equal to document.query selector box. And afterwards, during the click itself, I can now that I have a reference, now that I have a data stored in the hard drive of my Chrome, I can just recall the reference and say, hey, use the data under this name. Use the data under this name and change its style and width and height. So this should still work because we stored a reference and we reuse it. But let's take a look at what that looks like if we were to graph it out or lay it out. This is our empty space in our Chrome. In the beginning, there's nothing. Line 1, we go, hey, do a my box over here. Give a name, give a reference. this is the reference name right here. And what I want to do, by typing var my box, I create this reference name in this blank hard drive. And on the right side, what I do is I put in the data for the box. It may look something like 1, 0, whatever it may be. I don't know what it looks like. But what it does, it gives the box over there. So in this blank hard drive, now there is a new name. And beside the new name, there is the information about that box. Then afterwards, when we click on it, instead of going in and grabbing the box again, okay, look for the name my box in the hard drive. Like, okay, here's the name my box. And then it will take the data and put it in there. And change the style and width. Look, and again, look for the name my box in the hard drive. It'll look over here. And it finds that it's a box. And then it'll change that and whatnot. In fact, this is a math, like high school math. There's a terminology. Do you know what this math terminology is?
Equation.
Equation, yes. That's all math. Does anyone know? It's algebra. It is exactly algebra. It is algebra. You haven't learned algebra before? It's going to be very tough. A equals to B, so B equals to A. A equals to 1, so A plus B is 2. No. Now that's good and all. It's very nice to do. But with that in mind, that means we can create a whole bunch of different references. For example, we see that we're using the data 200px over here, right? We're using the data 200px over here. What we're going to do instead is replace this data by storing them in their own references. For example, it could be var my, and by the way, you can name this anything you want. It doesn't have to be my box. You can name this Bob, Mike, whatever you want. It can be name anything you want, because the name isn't what matters. The name is just a name that you give it. But for consistency's sake, so that I understand it, I'll use something called my num. And it's going to equal to the data 200. And then var my unit is going to equal to the data p and x.
Can you name with numbers?
Hmm?
Can you name it with numbers?
No, cannot name with numbers. That's a good question. It cannot.
Or symbol?
No. Actually, you could for only certain, but let's not get into that. So instead of 200px, we can replace all these data with all our references. Because right now, what we did essentially is have my num here, and it's associated with 200, and my unit here, and it's associated with the word px. And what we can do here is instead of 200px, we can go my num plus my unit. My num plus my unit. Because what we did here is we combined two data together to make the 200px data. So this line here is the same as writing. This line here is the same as writing my box.style.width is equal to 200 plus px, and that becomes 200 px, like so. And this line here is the same as writing height 200 plus px, and that becomes 200 px, like so. It's pretty useful, isn't it? Well, maybe. Because if I want to change it to something else, I could. Let's have one more button over here. Let's call it the expand button. Button ID equals to expand. 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 And just to practice our referencing variables more, instead of doing like this and add even listener, I'm gonna create a reference for my expand button, which will look something like this. Var exp but. Now, again, you can name it anything you want. Whatever makes you feel comfortable, that you understand. You know, because if I wasn't teaching you right now, I would be typing var eb because I understand what eb is. It's the expand button, obviously, right? No, but you know, you don't have to make long names if you don't want to make long names. As long as you understand it, then it's good. In the same way, when we click on it, we're going to change something in the script. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to minimize line 7 to line 13 by clicking on this button so it doesn't look too messy. You can do that if you didn't know. If you like, I don't want to look at this function right now, you can minimize it and not look at it. And I'm still going to do my box dot style dot width is equal to my num plus my unit for fun. And the same with the height. But this time, before I do this, I'm going to re-reference my num to make it equal to 300.
Do you override the bar value by doing this?
Yes. So it was originally 200, but when I click on expand, it will overwrite the original value, which is 200, and turn it into 300. So click is 200, but expand is 300 because we overwritten that expansion. We overwritten the number 200. So now it's 300 plus px. That makes 300 pixel.
By declaring the variable minus inside the function of exp bar, this is like locally declared and not visible to this.
No, this is declaring it. This is reassociating it.
So it overrides 200 by 300?
So this is saying take whatever was inside before and put 300 there. Take that out. Maybe you need to reassociate it on the first one back to 200.
Yeah, me too. Oh.
before you change width and height on the first click, you want to be associated.
Wait, I think it's the
So for example,
oh,
Sure.
it doesn't extend.
Because
Or the 300 times.
except you do the on click here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
So you just do an on click in this button.
Yeah. On. Okay. For my. Okay. Yeah. So I wouldn't use this.
The same thing, yeah, except you're wrapping it. Okay, well, what does the error say? What line? Yeah, okay, so your what is that? Listeners, what's the difference between this adding and this other this adding? Okay.
Oh. Yeah, this is
Okay. Yeah, so my box not stop. So you can see, right? 15. So these are the things that would hopefully catch on. Like very
oh.
So in the beginning, we say here, we're saying take whatever is in here right now, whatever it is, and right now,
Live video highlight this should be the
yeah.
Try using the they cover the
Yeah, it is. It is. It's okay.
Oh yeah.
Something's wrong with the kid. Is it good? Is it good?
Is it because you're not looking the source? I didn't see it. Oh, you have a CSS, you have a stuff. That one. Are you sure you're not right?
For your ID. Yes.
Live review is off. If I turn it off, it's no.
Inspect elements on, so it doesn't.
Yeah. Oh.
So it just refresh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't use the live reviews. In my opinion. In my opinion, live reviews.
But still, it has to be, but here it's not. Yeah, because see, if I just type one thing, then all this recommendation will come, right?
Oh, you want recommendation?
Yeah, yeah.
So you want to type.
Yeah, if I want to type dog, it should be a document or other stuff. Yeah.
That's in your preference. Probably check something in the preferences.
Or maybe
You're trying to. You know what? That's you really need it right now? For now, it's okay. Just let it be. Make sure you save everything first.
Still? We gotta move on.
You see that dog?
The mistakes.
Okay. Okay, moving on. Now, this is a pretty important concept to understand that we associate it with something here, and then we change it here. Because what I want is, I don't want just 200 and 300. Because it makes 300, right? When you expand something, it should expand indefinitely. It should go from 200, then to 210, then to 220, then to 230, and 240, and 50, and 60, and so on. So I need to have this variable change constantly over and over again. Which is why I would do something like this. My num plus 10 over here. But what does this line really mean? The left side over here means it's reassociating the information again. Meaning, it will search for, first it will search for my num. It's like, oh, there's my num. I want to replace this. That's why there's an equal there. What do you want to replace my num with? With my num. So what's my num? Then it goes, let's find my num again. It goes to the data and it looks for my num. And what's my num right now? 200. So it's 200 plus 10. What's 200 plus 10? And then it becomes 210 and it will reassociate the variable to 210.
Can't you do just my num plus 10?
Then it won't reassociate. What this would do is it'll just add 10, but you're not putting it anywhere. You're not re-referencing it. This will re-reference it. Replace whatever's there. Find my num and replace it with the new item over there. And how do we know that actually happens? Well, I'm going to introduce you to a way to figure out what's happening on your screen at any time in the background. Before my num equals to my num plus 10, you can try the following, which is console.log my num. In fact, let's add the words before. Oops. Before and a comma, my num. And then you're going to take that same console.log and do it after as well. Now you'll notice that there's a familiar word over here, console. Where do you think you'll see these information in your developer tool? And which tab would it be in? Console. You're telling your console to log in the background on what's happening. So you'll notice before it's 200, after it's 210. When you press it again, before it's 210 now because you added 10 to it. After it's 220. Before 220, after 230, under the console tab, and so on. So you can get an idea on what's going on. Now, I'm surprised no one asked this question yet, but it's hard to grasp in the beginning, because hey, why is this 200 and not quotation 200? Anyone ever thought of that? Why is this 200 and not in quote 200? It's not a string. That's a great answer. Why? Well, what's the wrong with it being a string then? Dude.
It's a fixed value.
Okay, let me ask you a simple question over here. In math, when you add two numbers together, you do basic math, right? What's 1 plus 1? 1 plus 1 in math is 2. Okay, now let me ask you a similar question. In English, what's 1 plus 1? It's 1, 1. When you in English, when you add two words together, it becomes concatenated. Whereas in math, when you add two numbers together, you actually do math. So how do we test case this? Let's actually quote the 200. It's no longer a number. It's now an English character. Let's see what happens before and after. Before, it's 200. After, it's 20,010. Why is that? Because the word or the characters 200 is concatenated with 10. Right? So there is a difference why we use quotation and not quotation. If you need to do math, you cannot use quotation. If you need to concatenate words, like for example, maybe you want to do hello, name, and you concatenate it whatever the name you type in, then you have to make sure they're both characters. Right. And so on. So going back, that's why we have numbers. Second trick question here. Why don't we just do something like this? Plus my unit. And then just leave my num over here. What's wrong with this? Doesn't that go from 200 to 210 pixel as well? It doesn't?
I don't know. It's not shaking my head.
See, it went from 200 to 210 pixel. It expanded. But then afterwards, it becomes 210 pixel, 10 pixel. Because he keeps adding the px over and over and over again. And it becomes 210 pixel, 10 pixel, 10 pixel. And then it gets 210 pixel, 10 pixel, 10 pixel, 10 pixel. That's why you get errors on there. So what I'm trying to illustrate to you is, first, order does matter. Second, the way you combine things does matter. And the more you're comfortable with getting these errors, the easier it is for you to figure out why you're getting it and whatnot. Okay, on your own, what's the opposite of expand?
Contract.
Sure, contract, collapse, whatever you want. Make one yourself.
Oh,
That goes the opposite way.
Reminds me of Brussels sprouts.
And I'm so confused myself. That's the way to go.
So, figured it out, but I did it by looking at Nico's because he did it the same way. So, can you just explain to me? Like, I still have an error message. It works now. I don't really understand why it works. But there is still an error message. So, like, I think where I got lost was when we started translating. When we added the variables in, I didn't know how that translated into this stuff format. And then this is what Nico has, and it works. So I assume this is the translated version with this format, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this,
So you don't. So what the difference here is that you don't need the arguments here anymore. And you just add it in.
yeah, okay. So we're replacing query selector box with my box, and then this.
That's right. Except my box. Right, my box over here is asking for box.
Right? Okay, I get it now. So I
But-
should use my exp or whatever this one is, which is
No, you're confusing yourself. Okay, query selector box, right? What are you trying to find? The box over there.
the
ID?
ID.
Is there an ID?
Okay.
That's right.
I see.
Yes.
Okay, so I am confusing myself.
Yeah.
So what?
And-
Why are we using my box then? If I'm looking at if it's a different button entirely.
Because you're still changing the same box. You're not changing another box.
Okay, yeah. This just
But the button is the one you're detecting. Like this you put it here. If you're doing what I'm doing, which is you're saying, I want to add the click through the script.
right.
So
But I already did the click up here.
so
right?
you don't use this becomes useless because you're already doing that there.
Yeah.
And same with width and height because you're not using it anymore. You're not passing to it anymore. You're using a variable that you associate with it.
Sorry, say that again. Instead of using width and height.
You don't have to use it because you're using. So this is only if you're passing information from up there.
Right. But we just declare our information. function.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's what's happening there.
I think I get that. Kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So just take your time.
Okay.
It's
So like,
it's not an easy one.
I kind of just took instead of plus 10, I just said minus 10.
Yeah, but you need. I want two buttons. Two buttons. One to
Two?
expand. One to.
Oh.
One to expand.
Okay.
Two buttons. Two buttons. One to expand. One to collapse. And if you're up for a challenge, make your box move left and right. How do you? How would you move it left, and how would you move it right? Yeah, one for left and one for right. You probably think about what CSS moves it left and right. Maybe it's a left and top thing. Maybe it's a margin left. I don't know.
You should make it smaller. Is it possible? So if I want to do this, is it possible to instead of use target qualities?
Yeah, of course, it's a hard one.
You have a
You have to detect your right key and left key. There's a something for that. It's called key up or key down. And then there's something called key code. So because every key you press is associated with numbers.
Okay.
So every time you press, they give you a number.
Okay.
It's a little bit more complicated without killing your head. That'll be later on. You'll learn all of it. As you're typing, you'll notice that once you get the hang of it, everything goes much smoother. And that's what you really want to grasp. That's because if original it's 100, right? And then here, the first thing you do is 200, right? So no matter what, it's going to go from 100 to 200. Yeah, so what's 200 minus 10? Originally it's 100, then it's going to go to 190. So it will look like it's expanded. But it's actually just zero. Because you see it as good. That's the first state, right? That's 100. Your CSS. So you're saying that you're gonna change it. What's the so maybe you want another variable that's not associated with your width and height. So this is excluding, right? This is basically saying here, can you show without doing it in the foreground? I want to see what's happening in the background. So uncomment. No, I didn't. Okay, so go here. See the word console? Go to the word console. So in the background, I can see. So I can't see numbers here, or sure, I can see all the things that's happening. Now I know exactly the pattern of how it's acting. Okay, so it's equal to the number, right? Yeah. So again, it's the number, the CSS. What's this? Like if this is if it's just if I type it in here, it will always become. I can't do any. Word. Word to there. That's why we use something called a variant. That original piece. Because we can change it over and over again.
I try move down by adding margin up, but maybe move down once.
My number.
So I'm figuring out oh, no, because it was like.
Okay, so let's go over it really quickly. Now you can do a lot of different things with this, obviously, but there is one concept that I need to emphasize on. So let's say I'm doing collapse over here. Whatever you want to call it, smaller, collapse, minus, contract, whatever it may be you want, that you want to name it. Okay, but more importantly is the following. You may go, well, maybe I can just copy and paste 16 to 23, and then that would kind of get me started somewhere. And I encourage that. If you know exactly what every line does, then you should copy and paste it. Saves a lot of time. But if you don't know what every line does, then you make sure you write every single line again to understand exactly what every line does. Now I'll show you why I can copy and paste. If I copy and paste this right now, copy and paste it, I know what every line does. So I know exactly what I need to change. First of all, I know that it's not going to be the expand button. I need to change to the collapse button. Second of all, I know it's not going to be plus, it's going to be minus. So because I know exactly what each line does, I can just copy and paste and change exactly the items that I feel I know what to change. If you don't know it, if you don't know what every line does, then it's a very horrible thing to copy and paste. It will screw you over during the test. You can ask any second years that how their copy and paste went. Right, so it's not something I encourage if you don't know what it does. Right, with that, you kind of. So if you do know exactly what every line does, go copy and paste everything, for all it matters. It's a good thing to do. Okay. So left and right, blah blah blah. I'm not gonna go over that. You can use absolute position. You can use margin left or whatnot. But the important concept today is that what we just showed right now is that CSS isn't just 100 pixel and 100 pixel like that. You can separate these in pieces of data and reference them. Instead of just saying, oh, I'm going to make a 100 by 100 box, you can separate all these data into its own pieces. And why do you want to separate them into its own pieces? Because by separating them, you have the ability to change them over and over again. Instead of just saying, oh, it's going to be 100 by 100 in my screen all the time, you have the ability to change that number to something else over and over again. And that's important because that means any CSS that has any kind of combinations of numbers and letters inside can be altered. Any CSS, right? For example, how about background colors? Can we alter background colors dynamically? What are the numbers associated to background colors then? You tell me. Hex numbers? Okay. That's one. You can separate it by hex numbers. Let's do an easier one though. Forget the hex ones. Hex is like you have to do to the power of 16, or whatever it may be. What's another format that we can use background colors for? Does anyone know? CSS questions. Have you tried RGBA? Yeah, RGBA or RGB. Have you ever tried doing background colors with RGB, like so? And then 0, 0, and 0 like that? Have you tried that before in your CSS? This is important. Look at this piece of data, right? By looking at it, you know what can be calculated within this whole part. Which items can be calculated? Which items can we apply math to it so that it changes over and over again? In this format over here. The zeros inside the brackets. Every single number here can be separated so that we can do calculations to it. Okay, let's try that. Let's make another button. We'll call it color. Color. And I'll have one called color but and color. So color stuff. Or I should say RGB colors. So since we want to calculate our RGB colors, how many numbers are there associated to the RGB color? Actually, what are the numbers associated to RGB colors?
255 to 0.
255 to 0. So there are 3 sets of these, right? Okay. That means how many variables are we making then? 3 different references. 1 for red, 1 for blue or RG green, and 1 for blue. And then let's do our events listener for now. Okay, before we go into this whole complicated situation, how do I change the background color of something? I want to change the background color of my box. How would I do that? My box dot style dot background color. And let's say right now it's 0, 0, 0. So let's change it to RGB. What's a good color? Let's say 55, 120, and 30. Sure. So at the very least, when I press on color, it should change to a different color. As we change what it's supposed to equate to. Now's the challenge here. Because what we have to do is we have to separate this big chunk of data so that we can combine our references together. Because right now this is called hard-coded. Why is it called hard-coded? And there's no variance to it. Because after we type this, it's over. There is no way to change it ever again. There's no way to change this piece of data associated background color in any other way again, because it's hard-coded. It's hard there. There's no other way to do it. So that's why we separated That's why we separated our stuff so that we can change one of them and combine it later on. Now, if you were to follow the same thing up here, you could potentially write something like this. We're going to separate this. We know that this number, which variable represents this number? R. And we know that this is G, and you know that this is B, right? So what's the extra information that's out here? This first part, this comma, and this last part, right? So you can say, oh, let's do it. Var begin equals to RGB, first part like that. And then you go var comma equals to an actual comma. And finally, var n is equal to the ending of it. And what this will eventually look like is the following. Instead of saying RGB, 55, 120, 30, comment this one out. It will look something like this. We're going to combine all the information together. Begin plus R plus comma plus G plus comma plus B plus comma plus N. Because we reassociate all the information, right? So this is like English, combining the words. Like, hey, this is the beginning of the sentence. This is the middle part of it. I'm putting comma in between the middle part, and then I'm gonna plus the ending for it. Because this, what it'll look like later on, eventually, it'll look something like this. RGB, the string RGB, plus 0, plus comma, plus 0, plus comma, plus 0, plus the end of it, like so. Algebra. Now, this does look confusing. And what I'm trying to show you is that there are multiple methods of writing these kind of data. For example, why do we want a variable to be RGB? Why do we even want that? Is the word RGB and open bracket ever going to change? When we change color, it's going to stay RGB, right? So instead of doing something like this, you could potentially say, do the following. And say, okay, since these are not going to change, I'm just going to hard code that. So in the beginning, instead of saying begin, RGB open, plus R, the comma is never going to change. It's always going to be a comma, no matter what. Green will change. Always going to be a comma, no matter what. And then, oops, okay, I made a mistake here. No one recognized it. There's no comma after the B, but the N is not going to change, and so on. There's no comma after the B. So this is the equivalent of line 46 over here. And this is a concept where you recognize what's hard data and what's a dynamic data. Hard data, these are hard, all these strings, they're orange, right? They're hard data. They never change. You cannot ever change it. But more importantly are the black characters here. Those are the ones that's going to change. 3 of these characters. So you can recognize your styles by combining hard data with varied data. For example, rotation. Whoa, calm down. I know, rage-inducing. For example, rotation. You can do rotation in CSS. Did you know you can do rotation in CSS? Rotation is a combination of characters and then a number and then the word degree. So again, what's the hard data? What's the dynamic data? With this, then we can go, okay, R is equal to R plus 10. G is equal to G plus 10. And B is equal to B plus 10. So let's try it. Color, slowly change to the value until it hits 255 or over. And this is the concept we're trying to slowly grasp, is that everything you type on the screen is associated with numbers and characters. And because they're associated with numbers and characters, you can apply math to it, or you can apply concatenations to it. That's the English terminology for combining two sets of characters. Or you can apply the opposite of concatenation. I don't know actually what that is, but you can delete characters from it so that it does different things. And by applying math and concatenation, you can have an endless ongoing kind of dynamic content in and out. Now, first of all, any questions on this before? Yes. Question? That's it. I have a question. Okay, so last little bit before we end of the day. Just to give you an idea of the amount of things you can do on here. Because math, you can do a lot of different math, right? This is basic math right here, plus and minus. But we can do things like random numbers. For example, we can say R is equal to math, there's a math library, dot random. And if you read out what random does, it gives you a random number between 0 and 1. 0 and 1, right? So for example, it could give you 0 randomly, or it could give you 1 randomly. Or it could give you 0.5, or it could give you 0.2, 0.7, and whatnot. Now here is back to high school math again. How many numbers do I want to go randomly for my red color? What's the range? What's the range? What is my range for my random number for my red color? How many numbers are there? 0 to 255. Okay, so how can I go from 0 to 1 so that it becomes 0 to 255? What do you do in order for it to go from the range 0 to 1 so that it becomes 0 to 255? Oh my. High school math control. How can so this gives me a number randomly from 0 to 1. It could be 0. It could every time I click it, it's a different one. It could be 0, it could be 0.2, it could be 0.7, it could be 0.6665, whatever it may be. It gives me a random number. But I want it to go to 0 to 255. So what kind of math can I apply here so that it goes to 0 to 255?
Less than 255.
Yeah? That's yeah, I guess yeah, that's something, but not it. That's a good guess though. I like the guessing. Okay. You multiply the whole thing by 255. What's 0 times 255?
0.
What's 1 times 255? Ah, very good. So you take 0 to 1, multiply by 255, and that would give you a number from 0 to 255. Because what's 0.5 times 255? 122. Wait, no, that's not right. 127.5, yes. So, but we can use decimals here. Do you know how to get rid of decimals in math? You round them. Come on, people. Math.round. So you see how many different math you can do on these things? Right. How do you round something? If it's 0.5 or higher, what happens to the number? It goes up. If it's 0.4 or lower, what happens to the number? Wow, very good. Okay, what's ceiling and what's floor? Does anyone know in math? Ceiling. It always rounds up. That's what ceiling is. Floor? Then if that's the case, what's floor? It always rounds down. What's an absolute value? Everything is positive when it's negative. Why would you use an absolute value? You use it every day, by the way, when you use Google Maps. Because if you're in the center and the place you're going to is to the east side, then it's a negative distance. And if it's a location on the west side, then it's a positive distance. But realistically, how far are you away? Maybe just 5 kilometers, even if it's a negative value and positive value. Oh man. In the future, someday. So what does this do really? It gives us a random red that goes from 0 to 255, a random green that goes from 0 to 255, and a random blue that goes from 0 to 255. So we get a random color every single time.
So that's randomly go from 0 to 1. Not more than 1.
Not more than 1, that's right. 0 to 1. So you may be able to get a random width and heights. You may be able to get a random location, random transition from one location to another. Now, yes. Now, I'm not expecting you to be completely comfortable with what we just did today, obviously.
So wait, you can do that with positions too?
Yes, that's right. But the more you get yourself involved into understanding that every CSS is just numbers and characters, and that you can separate the number and characters In fact, you can separate characters and characters, etc. That you can separate these and change these means you can change anything on the screen. Like anything on the screen that you can change with CSS on the spot, that's possible. So can I change something from circle to square? Can I change a square to an elephant? Yeah. Anything that you can possibly build on the screen that you can change data by, you can do it. But very important is that you grasp the concept properly, that you're not just building a box that has these dimensions. Is that they are these pieces of data that you can separate. And that you can apply math to it, or you can apply English to it. The rules of math and English. Because by using the rules of math and English, that's how you can create a dynamic layout or content or whatever you may want to have on here. Right, rounding, random number, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Yes?
Does JavaScript support like every language?
You mean
Like if I was to be in India and I don't.
you're saying type Indian on
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. Only English. Yeah.
Just English?
English. Yeah.
It's right here.
All right. Okay. So second tutorial will come up today.
Decide on your colors, master the signs.